Hi guys, and welcome to my 17th tutorial on C++ 2010, and in this tutorial I will talk about classes. This is the second tutorial in which I will continue the classes topic, and I will show you how to create Deconstructor, but also how to use overloading methods and overloading operators. So first of all, let us start with the Deconstructor. Deconstructor is something that is opposite of constructor. Deconstructor basically deallocates the memory of our objects or variables and frees basically the memory. When the lifespan of the variable or the object is finished, it will deallocate the memory and will free the memory. So we will have to have a class. So class example. And inside I will have two variables. Now when we use Deconstructor, we have to use the pointer variables. So pointer int, for example num1 and num2. And then we have public, and we will create a constructor which will take in two arguments of integer type, and the Deconstructor, which looks like this. So it's the same thing. You don't have the arguments, but when you use the Deconstructor, before the class you have to add the tilde sign. The tilde sign on your keyboard is probably next to the enter if you have British keyboards. If not, maybe somewhere else on the keyboard where you will have to find it yourself. I have it next to enter. And so this is how the Deconstructor or Deconstructor will look like. So tilde and the name of the class. We can also have some kind of method, for example int print, and to return num1, which is a pointer, plus, let's do the plus, and num2, also as a pointer. Okay, so this is our class. Now for the constructor example, there's operator of scope, operator of scope, again example. Inside two arguments of integer type like x and int y, and we can now assign to those variables we have, but those are pointers, so we will have to do something like this, equals new integer, and num2 equals new integer. And now we can assign those to the pointers. So num1 is equal to x, and pointer num2 is equal to y. Okay, so this is our constructor. Now for the Deconstructor, we also use example class, the operator of scope, but this time instead of doing the example method or the constructor, we use Deconstructor, which is this one. And inside we don't have any arguments. We just simply add a delete statement. We will delete the two variables, so num1 and delete num2. So this is our Deconstructor. If you have more variables, of course those have to be a pointer type, you can delete them here. So when the lifespan of the variable ends, at the end of the lifespan, the Deconstructor or Deconstructor will be called and will deallocate the memory of those variables. So we can have an object. Well, you won't see the result of the allocation, but we can have an object, obj, with some kind of values, and we can, for example, print them. So cout obj.print. As I said, you won't see any proof of this happening, but it is there and it works perfectly fine. It's just Deconstructor. So you construct first the value. When the program finishes, it will deallocate them from the memory. It's a pretty simple thing. Okay, so this is how the Deconstructor works. this is how you build it. So those two statements are for the destructor. And now I'll move on to actually the overloading statements. So overloading means to have the same methods or constructors. Even we can apply this to constructors as well. Have the same methods, but obviously we cannot have the same methods. So for example, you cannot have two constructors which are of the same type with the same number or types with the of the arguments. You cannot have that, but you can have two. Let me just delete this because we will not need this anymore. And the pointers as well. We don't need the pointers. The pointers are gone. We don't need them. Okay. So when you create a constructor and you have, for example, you want to have different constructors, so you will apply to different things. This one may apply to just numbers, two numbers, when you can use them later on for calculation. But you also, for example, want to have a default constructor. Well, you of course can. So example and nothing here. So as you can see, I use the same class name, which is example, but because I don't specify any arguments, this is a valid operation. If I were to input int, as you can see, this will produce an error, and I cannot have the same methods or the same constructors. But if I were to, for example, change it to string, I can now have this because those two are different arguments. And when I create my object, and instead of number here I add string, it will ask this. It will ask this constructor. It will execute it, and it will get the values to those variables, whichever I have. But for this purpose today, I will just use a default constructor and two integers constructor. So pretty simple. That's how you basically overload your stuff. It's called overloading, and you have basically the same name of the method but with different types of arguments. I will just add hard values here because I don't pass anything. So as you can see, I have two constructors. Now if I create objects such as this one, my constructor, which is with two arguments, will be executed. This one will be simply omitted. It will not be executed. But if I create, for example, objects such as this one, obj2, and I don't add any brackets, this constructor will be executed because the program automatically will search for appropriate constructor if there is one. If there is none, then it will produce an error. The object will return the error saying that there are no constructors or invalid arguments, stuff like this. So again, you can output this using the cout operation again, for example. So cout, let's see, obj2, for example, dot print. So I can do this as well, and line here. So I will produce two different results. One will be the variable, which I can put in here. So those will vary. And this one is always the same. When I create a default object with default constructor, it will always contain those values. This object will contain the values I pass here, so they may change. You can add variables here, so it will be a variable. And so that's how overloading your constructor works. Now overloading your methods is pretty much the same thing. You can overload your methods, and to overload your methods, it's pretty much the same thing. You just apply it to the method instead of the constructor. So you can copy the method. We have print method, for example. Now as you can see, if I paste it just like this and leave it, you will produce an error because I cannot have the same methods. But if I add int I, for example, I can have two print methods. So this overloads the print method, and it will choose the appropriate method depending on the arguments you use. So if, for example, I use a print as a method and I add some kind of number in here, I pass it, so for example 5, this method will be executed instead of this one, because it will search for the method which have an integer argument in it, and this method will be executed. I can of course add the I here as well, or I can do something else with it, so it depends. But as you can see, I can I can have two the same methods but with different arguments. So this one has none arguments, this one has 1. So pretty much very simple, and sometimes even useful, because you can have same name for the method but with different arguments. So you can, for example, use the print method and print different things. You don't have to name it print 1, print 2, print 3 and stuff like this. You just can change the arguments if the program is asking for such thing. So this is how to overload methods and constructors. So this is how to overload the methods and constructors. Now, overloading your operators is a different thing. For example, if I have 2 or 3 objects, if I have 3 objects, let's copy this one. I just change the 2 and this one 3. And I change the values, for example, 1 and 3. If I want to do something like this, obj3 is equal to obj plus, is equal, not minus. Obj, let's do minus this time, obj2. As you can see, I cannot do this because this operator is not valid for this kind of operations. Those 2 are objects, those 3 actually are objects, and I cannot do this. But if I use the overloading operators, I am able to achieve this operation. Let's just delete the spaces. I will be able to achieve this operation because I will use the overload operator. To overload the operator, you go to your class and you have to say something like this: example, which is the class, operator, example operator, and then you specify the operator, which is, for example, minus. I will use minus. If you have more operators, you will have to specify more operators. You will have to create 2 or 3 of those methods. But I have minus, so I will use minus, and inside the brackets I use example again. So this is how it will look like. Now, if you use overloading operators, your variables which you use should be public. So instead of private variables, you will have to declare them as public, because you will print them from the third object, for example. In this exercise, I will print them from the third object, from the obj3. So those will have to be public variables. And I don't have to do this one for now. Let's just leave it. Okay, so I have declared it. I have declared my operator, which is minus for minus. And below, as you do with the destructors and constructors, you will have to do something like this: example space, and write again example, which is the name of your class, then the operator of scope, and then operator minus, because this is the one I have. If you have, for example, plus, the operator will change here, so it will be according to your operator you have. If it's plus, you add plus here. If it's minus, you add minus. If it's times, if it's multiply, if it's divide, or whatever it is, you will have to change it here as well as here. And inside, I will have to create an object. For example, object like this. Now this function is able to return stuff. We return with this function, and I will have to create another object of example class. Let's say object2, which will be returned later on. And what you can do right now is, for example, object2 dot num1 is equal to num1 and minus and object which I passed. This is the one I passed. Object dot and num1. So I simply do a num1 of object 1 of one of those object minus the object I passed, and so both of those numbers will be subtracted from one another. So this is for number 1. And now if I want to do the same for the number 2, I have to do obj object, for example, object 2 dot num2 this time is equal to num2 minus object dot num2. So pretty simple, very simple thing. Now I just have to return it. So return object 2. So I just return the object 2. And what I do now, as you can see, this operation now is valid. It doesn't return the error for me. And what I can do now is use obj3 dot num1, because it's a public variable now, so I can actually use it, num1, and display it, for example, with some kind of space, and our object 3 dot num2 as well. So it will simply display 2 numbers for me, but those 2 numbers will be calculated of those 2 objects. I will show you this. As you can see, 1 and 2. So 5 minus 3 is 2, 2 minus 1 is 1. As you can see, the 2 objects, 2 parameters of those objects are calculated, as well as those. So when you have 2 objects, sorry, when you have 2 objects and you want to calculate something from them, you can do the operator of overriding the operator. So you can also use a plus, minus. As I said previously, you can shift left, shift right. You can pretty much do anything. I have a file on my webpage which has a list of the table, and there's a list of all available operators you can use with this operation. So you can override a certain operators, and there's a table, and it's explained what type of operators you can use actually. So that's pretty much how this looks like, and well, it depends on what type of thing you want to do actually with it. As I said, this one is used for calculations, but it can be used for many different things, because you can actually override many different many different operators, and it depends on what type of thing you want to do. You don't have to actually use this one. You can simply output it because it's already calculated. Or you can actually take those 2 numbers and even calculate them in object 3 again, maybe add them or something like this. So it's up to you actually what you want to do with it, and this is how you pretty much do it. As I said, if you want to plus it, for example, you use the plus operator, and this time plus here as well, for example. If you want to add it, again, this one will change to plus, and this one will change to plus. So pretty much you just have to change the sign, and the result will change as well. 3.8. So pretty simple thing. And so that's pretty much concludes the tutorial. In my next tutorial, I'll probably talk about the inheritance in C++, which is another part of classes. Later on, we will talk about polymorphism, which is another aspect of classes, and after I finish with polymorphism, inheritance and stuff like this, I'll finish with object-oriented, because this will be pretty much it about this. Then there will probably be some more tutorials about the C++ and on the console, and I will later on start with the Windows application. So I will show you how to create buttons and how to use those buttons and stuff like this. Later on, maybe when I get I don't know if I actually have it in my studios, because it's for the studios only. there's a library which allows you to create games basically. And I'll check, maybe maybe I have it with my studios, but if you don't have studios you probably won't have it. So it's, if you want to learn some kind of programming on the with the games, you will have to have a studios, Visual Studio, because it will probably contain the library which is needed. If not, maybe you can download it, I don't know. I always use Studio for this matter. But this will come later on in the future, probably next year, because I don't have really much time right now. So this is the end of this tutorial. If you want, you can visit my webpage for more tutorials, both written and videos. There are loads of them, different topics as well. If you like my videos, subscribe on the YouTube channel and like them, share them if you want to. And I will see you in my next tutorial. And bye.